Hi, my name is Rachel Pearsall. I'm the online learning manager with the National Alliance to End Homelessness, and I am joined today by Dr. Graham Pruss, the executive director of the National Vehicle Residency Collective, to talk a little bit about vehicle residency. And this is relevant to our work at the National Alliance to End Homelessness because a lot of folks who are living in vehicles could benefit from support in finding permanent housing. Not all, but some. So, Dr. Pruss, thank you so much for joining us. Let's start with a little bit of a primer about vehicle residency. What does it mean to reside in a vehicle, and when is residing in a vehicle a hardship as opposed to being like a really cool RVing lifestyle or hashtag van life lifestyle?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think first off, to reside, when is it residing in a vehicle? I think if a person is using a vehicle as their primary housing, their primary accommodation, that is residing in a vehicle. And that's kind of a loose definition because, a person might be residing in there as their primary housing for one night or for months at a time. And that kind of gets to your second question of like when, this is one of probably the most common questions about vehicle residency is, what about people who choose to be in a vehicle? Sort of this distinction between having no other option but to live in a vehicle and those who choose to. I think that a lot of people choose their form of accommodation based upon the options that are available to them. So a person who's facing eviction, who has enough time to plan to get into an RV, would be living in a vehicle, just like a person who is evicted and suddenly finds themselves facing either living in a tent or living in their car, and they may choose to live in their vehicle as well. So the concept of choice is often something that we talk about around vehicle residency, but the reality is that most people who live in vehicles, in some sense, choose to live in their vehicles. It might be another way that's helpful to think about it is sort of whether it's a tactical choice, as in it is something that is used to meet an immediate objective, or whether it's a strategic choice, as though it is something that's for a long-term goal. That we have some people who are living in vehicles as long-term affordable housing, as a way to work remotely and travel around the country, as retirement, as because they have disabilities and this is the best way to meet their life's needs. And then we have people who are living in vehicles because it is their immediate objective to not have a shelter that night, right? And that they immediately are found themselves without shelter and their vehicle becomes their best option for shelter.
So would you say that people who are living in vehicles are experiencing homelessness?
Many are, and then many are not, and so this is why it's not a monolithic group. There's many different people with a variety of different experiences and opinions who are living in vehicles. Many people living in vehicles do not identify as being homeless, and then there are many who do actually identify as being homeless. And this is why we at the National Vehicle Residency Collective use the term vehicle residency, because it's more inclusive and it covers sort of this wide diversity of people living in vehicles, whether they identify as homeless or not.
So do we know how many people are living in vehicles nationally? And if community leaders in a certain community wanted to get a sense of how many people were living in vehicles in their community, is there a way to do that?
Yeah, so we don't have a good number or a good understanding, I should say, of the number of people who are living in vehicles nationally. There's a couple reasons for that. The first and foremost is that the Department of Housing and Urban Development point-in-time counts do not require continuums of care to actually delineate vehicles versus other forms of what are considered unsheltered homelessness. And so because of that, some communities, so larger cities, particularly on the West Coast, are recording the number of people living in vehicles and reporting those numbers. But the number of those communities is like under 10, right, who are actually reporting that. So of those numbers, what we see is about 30 to 40,000 people at least are living in vehicles counted in point-in-time counts. But again, that's very low, considering that many of the communities actually aren't counting that. A recent American Community Survey from the Department of Housing and Urban Development showed that approximately 100,000 people, 130,000 actually, may be living in their vehicles or are reported as living in their vehicles in campgrounds and RV parks and sort of on the road. Some estimates have shown, I've actually seen an estimate that was up to, I think it was 7 million people living in vehicles, though I believe that actually includes people who are long-haul truckers, which maybe we should be including in this number because they are living in their vehicles too, for at least a period of time. The National Vehicle Residency Collective estimates that it could be up to about 1 million people who are living in vehicles. And we use that number because there are towns like Quartzsite, Arizona, which actually grow to about 750,000 people who are living in vehicles between January and March every year. And that's just one little town. So we're looking at the numbers are probably in the area of around 1 million. It's hard to say though, exactly.
I had no idea. Those are incredible numbers. Well, let's talk a little bit about the experience. Like, what is it? Obviously, we're talking about different kinds of experiences depending on your situation, but in general, what is it like to live in a vehicle, and what are some things that would surprise people about the experience of living in a vehicle?
Yeah, so that's a really good question too. The experiences of living in a vehicle, I think, often are dependent upon the infrastructure that's available to the person. So there are many people who are living in vehicles who are living in, like, say, public streets, who don't have access to garbage or water or a place to dump their septic waste, their bio waste. And the experiences of that person could be very, very different. And also in the type of vehicle, whether that's a small vehicle or a larger vehicle like an RV, could be very different than a person who's, say, living in an RV campground or in what are called long-term visitor areas out in the Bureau of Land Management areas, where they actually have access to water and toilets and a place to dump their septic waste. That they actually charge $1 a day for a person to park in those long-term visitor areas for up to 6 months. So the experiences of a person in that place could be very different than the person who's parked in an urban setting, say around the Home Depot, right? Because they may not have access to the services, the vital civic amenities that we all need for our households to be healthy and supportive places for our lives. So I think that for people who are living in smaller vehicles, I actually have a Ford Flex that's built out as a car. So when I do my research and I'm able to travel on the road, I sleep in the back of that vehicle. It's a passenger-sized vehicle, as an SUV, so it's a little bit larger. But my experience in that can be very, very comfortable. I've got a full-size bed in there. I've got a refrigerator. I've got power. Many people who I meet who are living in passenger-sized vehicles who are connected to some form of employment or regular Social Security or disability or retirement savings can be living very comfortably in their RVs. Or in their smaller vehicles. I know some people who are working remotely, making $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year, living out of an Odyssey, a Toyota Odyssey minivan, and are loving it, and they're living their best lives. Now, at the same time, I also met a lot of people who are living in smaller passenger vehicles who want to get out of that vehicle as quickly as possible, who are living in that vehicle because they had no other option but to move into that vehicle. They may be in that vehicle with their children, with their pets. It can be very difficult to go to the bathroom in a vehicle like that. It can be difficult to maintain one's hygiene in a vehicle like that. It can be also very difficult on the body. So often because particularly in wetter, colder areas, the person may be sort of confined inside the vehicle. And that can have effects on because a person has to sit upright inside the vehicle for long periods of time. I've seen that cause edema, or the pooling of liquids, water in the lower extremities, and actually have caused physical splitting of skin and everything. It can be really difficult and can become debilitating for a person to move. On the flip side of that, and we get up to the RVs, when you have a larger RV or a trailer to be able to move around in, it can be a lot easier for a person to maintain a sort of standard of life that we're very familiar with in the United States. Many of these vehicles have a bathroom, they have a kitchen area, a sleeping area, a dining area. Many times, if the vehicle's parked on the street, they may actually tape off the bathroom and make it so people can't use it, because, again, if you don't have access to dumping it, then you're effectively living inside of a porta potty, and people don't want to do that. Right? And again, it really depends upon the infrastructure, on what sort of amenities are made available to that vehicle, and what sort of resources the person who's living in the vehicle has.